One of the most famous people in history is a man who traveled from Venice, Italy to the Forbidden City in Yuan Dynasty China in the late 1200s, Marco Polo. While he wasn't the first by any means to visit China, he got famous by documenting his journey, which is admittedly questionable in many areas, but still, by the mid-1500s, as Europe now had colonies around the world, going around the world wasn't that unusual for them. But you often don't hear about anyone from other parts of the world doing that at this time. China stopped its expeditions of exploration under Zheng He's fleet over a century ago and went into isolation. Visits to Europe from Asia happened occasionally through trade or religious missions, but something like an outright diplomatic mission to Europe didn't really happen from China until more modern times. After all, China is the Middle Kingdom, why should they? But that's just China. Japan, on the other hand, did send diplomatic missions to Europe. But before we can get into that, what's something you need to travel with at all times? Wallets. And you really need good ones. Cheap leather wallets just aren't as well designed as the ones from this video sponsor, Ridge. Ridge makes amazing metal wallets with a minimalist design where you can store all of your cards and cash. I'm still using the wallet that they were kind enough to give me, and I don't think I can even go back to my original wallet. If you guys want to join the metal wallet side, you can click the link in the description and use the code IMPORER to get a 10% discount. Be sure to get that wallet while you can, and thanks again to Ridge for sponsoring this video. So at first, missionaries in Japan had some success and converted many people, and as a result, 3 Christian daimyos sponsored the idea of a diplomatic mission to Europe. On February 20th of 1582, 4 men set off in a mission known as the Tensho Embassy. These 4, along with some helpers, visited Portuguese Macau, Kochi, and then Goa in India for the first 9 months, and then they took the long journey around Africa to arrive in Lisbon, Portugal. They have officially become the first official Japanese emissary to Europe. They moved on to Madrid and then Rome to visit Pope Gregory XIII on March 23rd of 1585, over 3 years after the journey started. They would also visit Pope Sixtus V since Gregory would die later that year. Eventually, after an 8-year journey, they arrived back in Japan on July 21st of 1590. Their notes were published by Jesuit Duarte de Sande into a text called The Mission of the Japanese Legates to Roman Curia. Roman Curia is a fancy term that means the area is administered by the Pope. However, Japan wouldn't just visit Rome diplomatically once, but twice. In 1609, the technically retired but still very powerful shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu signed a treaty of trade allowing for a Spanish factory to be built in East Japan. Remember, this is before industrialization, so this factory isn't what you're thinking of. It's mining and handmade production, but one of the stipulations of this treaty involved sending a Japanese embassy to the Spanish court. The first few attempts didn't end very well due to things like weather, but in 1613 they tried again, and this time they sent Hasekura Tsunenaga, beginning the Keicho Embassy. This time, instead of going around Africa, Hasekura's mission first went to Spanish Mexico, becoming the first Japanese person to visit the Americas. There was initial confusion on the ceremony on their arrival, and a fight would actually break out. In one of the coolest sentences I can say in history, in 1614, a Japanese samurai stabbed a Spanish soldier in Acapulco, Mexico, as recorded by the grandson of an Aztec nobleman. That's just a cool event in every way. That's amazing. Luckily, due to the scope of the mission they were on, including visits to King Philip and the Pope, they were able to calm things down and continue on their mission without getting in much trouble. But some of the mission stayed behind in Mexico. Hasekura then moved on to Cuba briefly and then straight to Spain, where he officially converted to Christianity, being baptized as Francisco Felipe Faxakura. Then they took a brief stop in St. Tropez, a harbor in France, where a hilarious detail was recorded. They blow their noses in soft silky papers the size of a hand, which they never use twice, so that they throw them on the ground after usage, and they were delighted to see our people around them precipitate themselves to pick them up. I'm sorry, I just love this idea of a samurai using essentially a 17th century Kleenex, littering it, and people around them geeking out over it. By November of 1615, they visited Rome to meet Pope Paul V. They talked about an alliance with the Christian daimyos to help convert all of Japan, but that obviously never ended up materializing. After this meetup, the journey back home began, and it was basically the same route, except on the way back from Mexico they made a brief stop in the Spanish Philippines. But in August of 1620, 7 years after the voyage began, Hasekura returned home. But Japan in this time had greatly changed. Now Japan was very xenophobic, starting to suppress European ideas, including Christianity, and beginning the famous period of Japanese isolation. In fact, only 2 days after Hasekura's return, Christianity was banned in his daimyo. The rest of his life is uncertain, other than that he died of disease in 1622. So as a result of Japan's isolation, Hasekura's diplomatic expedition was the last Japanese diplomatic expedition to anywhere in Europe or the Americas until 2 centuries later after the modernization under the Meiji period. But in this time, Japan had 2 major diplomatic missions to Rome, which I'm frankly surprised aren't mentioned more often when teaching history. I mean, how cool is it to think about a samurai visiting the Pope and getting his painting taken there? But luckily, even if it isn't taught in schools, which it should be, studying history on your own can reveal surprises like this that just make it that much cooler of a subject. I'm Emperor Tigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time. If you liked the video, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and of course support my Patreon, which helps keep this channel afloat, and every donation is appreciated.